Hey 918ers, it's Geek Boy here, and hitting theaters this weekend is Marvel and Sony's Venom, which is Sony's latest attempt to kickstart an extended universe featuring characters from the Spider-Man franchise. Now, while anticipation from general audiences has been pretty high on this one, the reception to the clips and the trailers among the fan community has been a bit lukewarm. Initial budget figures released for this movie put it in the $65 to $85 million range, but some more recent information that's emerged pegs the cost of the upcoming Spider-Man spinoff to be closer to about $100 million. And to many, the idea of a $100 million movie about one of Spider-Man's most prominent villains that doesn't really feature Spider-Man, seems kind of dubious. For a lot of us, it'd be like doing a movie about the Joker with no Batman in it. And hold on, what? Oh, they're doing that. That's a thing. We've really got, we got a Joker movie. It kind of blows the rest of my intro. I don't know who thought. Hell with it. Talking Geek starts now. Start the music. Okay, gang, welcome back after the break. Once again, I'm Geek Boy, and as promised in the opening, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Venom, which opens at over 4,000 theaters this weekend. However, before I do that, I need to discuss a couple of things in an attempt to kind of provide some context for this review. First thing, Venom is not a film I was actually asking for, much less really looking forward to. Those who've tuned into previous episodes of The Talking Geek will know that I even told Jay the Blues Man that I thought this film was kind of a bad idea. Not that that's ever stopped Hollywood in the past from making films that I didn't think were good ideas, but regardless, it's here now, it's in theaters, and it's part of the genre movie landscape. The second thing, Venom is not a character that I have a lot of attachment to. I am familiar with the character's origins from the Secret Wars saga from the 1980s, but I never really tracked with the character much after that. And I say this to kind of level the playing field for this review, since I don't have a huge attachment to the legacy of the character. I had to get in the mindset of just reviewing this film in the context of what it is. That being said, I'm fully aware that I may single out something that I dislike, but fans of the character could say, oh no man, that's spot on. Or vice versa, I could have really zoned in on something that I thought was cool, but could have been kind of off-putting to the hardcore Venom fans. So, with that being said, let's dive into this review of Venom. As I stated earlier, I went into this film with lowered expectations, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There have been plenty of times where I sat in theaters not really expecting much from a film, only to be either completely surprised or at the very least enjoying it a lot more than I anticipated. In the case of Venom, those expectations were driven low by three things. As I said earlier, I didn't really see a need for this movie to exist in the first place. The second thing was my reactions to the trailers and the clips. And lastly, were the scathing reviews of it that dropped the day or two before its release. And I want to focus on those just for a moment. A lot of the reviews for this film, both online and in print, have been beyond brutal. Some of them come across as people who have just already decided in advance that they're going to hate this movie. And, to be fair, there's times that this movie doesn't really do itself any favors. It gives plenty of fodder to feed that kind of confirmation bias, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. But overall, and I have to stress this, for those who have read those online reviews, Venom is not that bad. The other thing is, I don't think it was particularly good either. For my sensibilities, it's a solid piece of mediocre PG-13 four-quadrant entertainment, most likely due to the previously mentioned $100 million price tag that Sony has to recoup. And because of that, there were times where, had the filmmakers or Sony been a bit less risk-averse and a bit more budget conscious, they could have pushed some boundaries, and I think we might have had something really extraordinary. And by that I mean there were creepy moments, but nothing terrifying enough to push this film into horror territory. There was a lot of violence, but it's completely bloodless. There was some quirky self-awareness to it, but not enough to make the movie a satire or a dark comedy. And as a result, it just kind of straddles the fence on what kind of movie it wants to be, and it never really crossed my own personal boundaries of what makes a film bad, but it never fully became great either, although it did have its moments. Since I can't really speak too much on how successfully the filmmakers captured the spirit of the Venom character, I'm going to run down the individual things I thought the movie did well, as well as comment on some things I thought where it kind of missed the mark on. Number one, the CGI. For all the grief given to this film, for some of the images in the trailers, I thought the CGI was just fine. The symbiotes look convincing in their little containers, and the times when the tentacles extended out, which I found in the trailer to be kind of off-putting. They actually looked better. They looked like they'd gone back and re-rendered those to make them look more convincing. And Venom as a character, for the most part, is pretty convincing as well. And he looks pretty comic book accurate, with one main exception, which we'll talk about later, and hardcore fans have already picked up on it. Now, as with any CGI-heavy film, whether it be The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, there is always going to be one or two shots that seem to look a bit wonky or a bit off, and Venom has a couple of those, but not near enough to really ding it or criticize it for him. The second thing that I thought really worked were the action set pieces. With the exception of the final battle, I felt like all the action scenes worked extremely well. In particular, the motorcycle chase that's featured in the trailer so heavily, as well as another one that hasn't been shown as much, that features Venom facing off against a SWAT team and the police in a tear gas-filled building. I mean, this thing is very well staged. It's very suspenseful. It looks amazing. Especially the SWAT showdown, because Venom is obscured by the smoke and it's a bit disorienting, which is what the filmmakers were going for, and I think on that one it was particularly well done. The third thing that was really great about this movie was Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy's always been one of my favorite actors. He consistently gives good performances that are appropriate to the material, and sometimes he even elevates the material in some cases. I mean, I think we can all admit he was one of the more watchable things about Star Trek Nemesis. And even though there's times where he does go off the rail a bit, without a doubt, this entire film would have collapsed without Tom Hardy holding it together. I mean, it's obvious he's having a time of his life in this role, and sometimes he comes across as the only actor in the movie who actually cares about giving a good performance. As a result, he does go a bit broad in some places, but even in that, he is always quirky, and he's interesting to watch, and again, at times, he seems like he's the only one really trying to drag this film over the finish line. The fourth thing that really worked for me is a character played by Jenny Slate. She plays a research scientist, Dr. Nora Skirth, who initially works for the main villain, Carlton Drake, but kind of turns into an ally of Eddie after she can no longer stomach the research going on that she's been a part of. Now, Slate's character is probably one of the better written of the secondary characters, but she really digs her teeth into it and really imbues the character with a bit of resolve and empathy that you normally don't see in a minor role in a film like this. So, the number one thing that didn't work, again, is Tom Hardy. There are times, particularly after Eddie and the symbiote join, that Tom Hardy's performance goes a bit over the top, especially when he's conversing with the symbiote after he's become bonded with him. Now, a lot of these scenes play out as Eddie hearing a voice in his head and trying to converse with it while still, making sense. I mean, he never really tips the scale into Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider territory, but those moments are there when I was worried that we were heading down that path. And those moments are few, but they do stick out. And speaking of the performances, the rest of the cast is another problem. It's pretty obvious that, again, Tom Hardy understands what kind of movie he's making. The rest of the cast almost seems to be phoning in their performances at times. I mean, of these actors, Michelle Williams does the most damage to the film. She plays Eddie's girlfriend / fiancée, Anne, and she gives a wooden, nearly emotionless performance. And that, coupled with her complete lack of chemistry with Tom Hardy, made it hard for me to accept that they were engaged, to be married, much less cared about each other. And this was really disappointing, considering some of the great performances that she's given in movies like The Greatest Showman or All the Money in the World. It was just really surprising to me. Now, another actor who suffers and who seems to be delivering a completely different performance than the other two, or three leads, depending on how you look at it, is Riz Ahmed as Carlton Drake. He's the main villain of the film, and anyone who's seen Rogue One knows he's capable of bringing life to a character that may not be that developed on the page. But in this, he comes across almost like an underwritten Bond villain from either the Roger Moore or the Pierce Brosnan era. His motives keep shifting and his motivation's never quite clear. However, that's more of a problem from the final thing that didn't work for me. And that final thing that didn't work for me was the script. Now, before we start this segment on the script, I feel the need to do a little screenwriting 101 for people just so we can kind of keep our terminology straight. From a story perspective, the film is fine. It moves from A to B to C in a logical fashion, again with one noted exception, which we'll talk about. But the character motivations, their dialogue, the tone, and even the dramatic rules created in the script constantly shift. And as a result, I was on more than one occasion kind of taken out of the film by something that didn't make sense, other than it needed to happen then for the story to move along, which, considering this film boasts at least 3 credited screenwriters, and I've heard rumors that there could be as many as 7, that's a bit frustrating. Carlton Drake, the villain, is probably the hardest hit by this week's script. As I said before, you could probably place the phrase Mr. Bond after every other line of dialogue he speaks and literally lose track of what film you're watching. His motivations in experimenting on the symbiote range from curing cancer, then they go to life prolongation, then to fixing the environment, to solving the riddles of long-term space travel, to, I think, finally fixing the overpopulation problem or something. Anyway, after a while, all of his motives just got lost in the whole I'm a villain because I'm an asshole type of motivations. And these were the type of things that kind of plagued the early Marvel films, but shouldn't be doing it now in this day and age. Another area where the script gets lazy is when Eddie breaks into the villain's building, aided by Jenny Slate's character, and in my opinion, they just got in way too easy. I mean, she smuggles him in, but for this type of facility, there's no mention of security cameras, motion detectors, all the things that any reasonable person would expect to encounter when sneaking into a top-secret facility. And not that they couldn't have gotten in, but I just wanted it to be a little harder than they depicted it in the movie. Another thing that hurts this movie, as we've mentioned before, is there's no Spider-Man in it. Venom is forever enshrined as a Spider-Man villain, and by not including the web-slinger in this film, it leaves some dramatic currency on the table, as well as forces the screenwriters to concoct some completely separate origin story, not only for the symbiote, but also for Eddie Brock and his situation. And in some cases, those new circumstances just aren't as compelling as the original. In fact, the one non-comic book accurate aspect of the Venom character is not having the spider on his chest, so in addition to the dramatic circumstances being changed, it forced a slight redesign in the character's look. But the most egregious area that bothered me was the dialogue. The dialogue in this movie at times is atrocious. In fact, it makes me reconsider my criticism of Hardy's performance, since given some of the lines he was asked to say, it makes me wonder how he could have delivered them any other way. I mean, some of the dialogue in this script comes across like it was written by a 15-year-old trying to sound like a badass.
We will eat both your arms and then both of your legs, and then we will eat your face right up your head. You will be this armless, legless, faceless thing rolling down the street like a turd in the wind.
I mean, I can't think of any place else I could watch a scene where the hero's love interest looks at him wistfully, with as much sincerity as she can muster, and utter the line, "Honey, I'm sorry about Venom." I mean, there were times I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Which brings us to the final thing that didn't work for me, the tone. Venom is a film badly in need of a through line when it comes to its tone. As I mentioned before, the filmmakers could have gone full-out horror. Given the source material, they could have gone the Paul Verhoeven route and done a dark comedy in the vein of RoboCop or Total Recall, or they could have gone full-out action-adventure. Any of these would have been fine, but the script tries to do it all, and it doesn't completely succeed in any of them. All of these issues kind of add up to one thing, and as much as I hate to be a part of the pack mentality, I have to agree with some of the media outlets who've said that this film comes across like a comic book film from a bygone era. If this movie had come out pre-Iron Man, say 2007, it would be on everyone's top 10 game changer list, next to Blade, next to Batman, the Tim Burton one, next to Iron Man. However, with it being released now, in an era where comic book films have become so sophisticated and so nuanced, it can come across as a bit juvenile, belonging alongside Ghost Rider and Daredevil more than those other films. And you know what? That's just kind of too bad. After pointing out all the flaws of this film, it's easy to think that I hated it, but I want to reaffirm that is far from the case. Again, I don't think it's a great film, but it's by no means a terrible one. It has its shortcomings, some of them quite glaring, but those shortcomings are mitigated by the great action scenes, the visual effects, and of course, Tom Hardy. So, in a way, it's kind of a cinematic Sour Patch Kid. It gives you something you like alongside some things you really wish you'd rather not have. So in conclusion, I want to say this. My review of Venom is just that. It's mine. I would never presume to speak for any of the other members of Fanboys 918, much less some of the folks who may be watching or listening to this who I've never met. I felt it necessary to say this because after my screening, I encountered a group of guys in the lobby who stopped me and were just on fire about this movie. I mean, they loved it and couldn't wait to see the next one and where the franchise was going to go from here. So remember, film is a very subjective experience, special and different for everyone. And I'd ask that everyone out there take my review under consideration, but by no means should I, or any other critic for that matter, be the deciding factor if you go to see a movie or not. For the folks out there that are charged and pumped to see this movie, by all means go. And I sincerely hope you enjoy it and have a good time, because that's what seeing a film in a theater is ultimately about, losing yourself in another world for a couple of hours. And if you're going to be there anyway, you might as well enjoy the ride. In fact, if you do, come back to our site and let me know where I missed it in the comments section. Till then, this is Geek Boy, signing off. See you guys in the movies.